My name is Elena Whitmore. I'm 39 years old and have spent the last decade tucked away in the peaceful, almost too quiet suburbs of London. On the outside, my life might seem enviable. Comfortable home, a respectable husband, a well-groomed routine that keeps the days from blurring too much into one another. I've been married to Richard Whitmore for 7 years. He's a good man by most standards, hard-working, dignified, endlessly polite, but always preoccupied, always somewhere else. His mind lives in boardrooms and business deals more than it does at our dinner table. Our marriage isn't exactly broken, but it hasn't been whole for some time. We coexist with ease, share responsibilities, and maintain appearances. But the warmth, the spark that once tethered us to each other, has dimmed. We sleep in the same bed but dream separate lives. There are words we haven't said in years, thoughts we tuck away to keep things calm, functional. Please share your thoughts in the comment section below. Each of your shares is not only a motivation for us but also contributes to spreading value to the community. Richard has a son from his first marriage, Daniel. He moved in with us when he was 16. Now, at 20, he's still here, though you wouldn't know it by the silence he leaves in his wake. Daniel is the kind of young man who makes you question your instincts. Always polite, always restrained. His voice never rises, never stumbles, but his eyes are a different story. They're sharp, intense, always watching. Not in an obvious way, but in the way that makes you second-guess what you're doing, what you're thinking, what you're hiding. He rarely speaks to me, and when he does, it's as though each word has been carefully chosen, weighed for consequence. I used to try to connect with him. I don't anymore. Something about his silence unnerves me, not because it's cold, but because it feels deliberate. Then came that Thursday. It was raining, the kind of soft, steady drizzle that turns the world into a blur through your window. Richard came home early that day, his expression unreadable, his phone clutched tightly in his hand. "I have to go to Manchester," he said, eyes flicking toward the hallway as though expecting something or someone. "Business. It's urgent. I'll be back tomorrow." I didn't ask questions. I never do anymore. It wasn't unusual. These sudden departures had become part of his routine, and I had long stopped pretending I didn't notice the frequency of them. He kissed my cheek with practiced familiarity and wheeled his suitcase out the door, disappearing into the gray evening like he always did. Only this time something felt different. I poured myself a generous glass of wine and sank into the sofa, letting the cool, velvet cushions cradle me as I exhaled a long, quiet breath. Outside, the rain had begun its gentle descent, tapping rhythmically against the windows like a lullaby. The house was still, the kind of silence that feels a little too heavy, too complete. I liked it that way, especially when I assumed I was alone. Daniel, my younger brother, was hardly ever home these days. He spent most of his time buried in textbooks or out with friends from university, rarely making it back before midnight. So I settled into the evening expecting solitude, relishing it, really. But I was wrong. It was just past 10 p.m. when I stepped into the bedroom, brushing out the tangles in my hair in front of the mirror. That's when I heard it. A soft knock, barely audible, like someone hesitating on the other side of the door. I froze for a second, brush mid-air, and turned toward the sound. The door creaked open slowly, and there he was. Daniel stood in the doorway, his dark hoodie damp and clinging to him from the rain. His hair matted in uneven tufts. Water dripped from the cuffs of his sleeves. He looked like he had just stepped out of a storm cloud. "I didn't know you were home," I said, my voice breaking the quiet more sharply than I intended. "Just got in," he replied, his voice low and a little distant. There was a pause that stretched longer than it should have. He didn't move, just stood there, hovering in the doorway like he wasn't sure if he wanted to come in or disappear. "Is everything okay?" I asked, watching him closely. His eyes flicked toward the window, then back down to the floor. "It's storming bad out there," he said, almost as if it were a warning. Then more quietly, "I keep hearing things. Noises." Something about the way he said it unsettled me. Not what he said, but how. His tone wasn't fearful exactly, but alert, listening for something I couldn't hear. I offered a small, reassuring smile, though my fingers tightened slightly around the brush. "It's just the wind," I said. "Come in for a minute if you want." He hesitated, and for a moment I couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone was out there in the dark, just beyond the sound of the rain. Watching. Waiting. He stepped into the room slowly, his movements hesitant, almost cautious, like someone crossing into unfamiliar territory. Water dripped from his sleeves, forming tiny dark spots on the floor. He didn't look at me. Instead, he made his way toward the bed and sat carefully at the edge, as if unsure whether he had the right to be there at all. His shoulders were hunched forward, and I noticed the tightness in his jaw, the way it pulsed with restrained tension. His hands, restless in his lap, kept fidgeting, tugging at the hem of his hoodie, fingers twitching, unable to settle. Something about him was off. He looked like he was carrying the weight of something invisible and heavy. "Something's not right," I said, my voice quieter this time, more careful. "Are you okay?" He didn't answer right away. The pause was long enough that I almost repeated myself, but then he finally spoke. His words hushed, almost embarrassed. "Can I just stay here tonight? Just sleep here? I don't feel right." I blinked. That wasn't like him. Not at all. Daniel was independent to a fault. He didn't ask for comfort, didn't admit to discomfort. He barely even came home anymore unless he had to. The air in the room felt heavier somehow. I glanced at him, trying to read his expression, but his gaze stayed fixed on the floor. The only sound was the persistent rain, now louder, more urgent, rattling faintly against the glass like impatient fingers. A shadow of confusion passed through me. I didn't understand what had shaken him, but something about the storm, the dim, flickering lights, and the strange, still quiet of the house made me decide not to question it too deeply. "Not yet." "Okay," I said, nodding slowly. "Just sleep." I pulled back the covers and slid into bed, the sheets cool against my skin. Daniel lay down beside me without a word, pulling an extra blanket over himself like it was armor. I placed a pillow between us, more out of instinct than necessity, a quiet boundary, one we both silently acknowledged. But even with that space between us, I could feel the tension radiating off him. My heart was beating faster than I wanted to admit. I wasn't sure why. Maybe it was the unusualness of it all. Daniel in my room asking to stay. Maybe it was the way he looked at the window earlier, as if something outside had followed him in. Or maybe, just maybe, it was something I hadn't let myself think about until now. Something that had always lingered quietly in the background. We lay there in silence, the space between us thick with things unsaid. The storm outside swelled in volume, as if feeding off our unease. Thunder rolled across the sky, deep and rumbling, and a bolt of lightning cracked through the darkness, flooding the entire room with a sudden electric flash. For a heartbeat, everything was stark and sharp. His face half lit in ghostly white, the shadows thrown hard against the walls, and then it was dark again. And still he said nothing. Neither did I. "Are you scared of storms?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, as if anything louder might disturb the fragile stillness between us. There was a pause. Long one. I wasn't even sure he'd heard me at first. The rain outside had settled into a steady rhythm, like a drumbeat from somewhere far away, and for a moment, it seemed that might be the only answer I would get. Then, quietly, he said, "No." But there was a weight to that word, a heaviness that lingered in the air. "I'm just scared of being alone." He said it plainly, but his voice carried something deeper, something rooted and old, not the kind of fear you grow out of, not a child's fear of thunder or lightning. It was the kind of fear that sits with you, even in silence. The kind that follows you into adulthood and hides in the quiet moments, when no one is watching. His voice didn't shake, but it carried the rawness of someone who had felt that aloneness more than once, who knew its shape and weight too well. "You're not alone, Daniel," I said softly, turning slightly to face him in the dark. He shifted just enough that our faces were nearly aligned, separated only by shadows and breath. I could see the faint outline of his features now. His eyes barely open, searching, uncertain. He was closer than I'd realized. His presence no longer just beside me but unmistakably with me. "I know," he murmured, and there was something different in his tone now. Something layered. "That's why I came here." There was no need to ask what he meant. Felt it. His words landed somewhere deep in my chest. Slow, deliberate, unguarded. In the quiet that followed, I felt his fingers graze mine under the blanket. Barely a touch. Question more than a gesture. Tentative. And I didn't pull away. Was it wrong? Maybe. Probably. But at that moment it didn't feel wrong. Felt human. Real. Familiar even. Like the past folding itself into the present. Blurry and undefined. Like something that had always been there but never acknowledged. The space between us wasn't just physical now. It was filled with unspoken memories, missed moments, things we never said but maybe should have. A shared history that wasn't romantic, but wasn't entirely innocent either. It lived in the in-between. I closed my eyes, not sure what I was allowing, only that I didn't want to break the stillness. The storm outside had passed, but inside, something quieter was beginning to stir. Something fragile, strange, and deeply human. Morning came softly. The first thing I noticed was the light, warm and golden, spilling across the bed like a gentle tide. I blinked against it, slowly waking, my body still wrapped in the hush of night. And then I turned. Daniel was still there. He lay on his side, facing me, his features relaxed in sleep. In the daylight he looked different. Softer, yes, but older too. Grown. Not the teenage boy I had first known. Not the same kid who used to slam doors and stay out too late. There was something changed in him now. A quiet strength in his face. A stillness that felt earned. And as I looked at him I realized, this wasn't the same story we'd once been in. This was something new. Something waiting to be understood. The morning passed in a strange haze. I slipped out of bed quietly, careful not to wake Daniel. The warmth of where he had slept still lingered in the sheets. My body moved on autopilot, through the hallway, down the stairs, into the kitchen, while my mind stayed stuck in the quiet moments of the night before, replaying the fragments I couldn't quite explain. I made a cup of coffee, the rich aroma cutting through the morning stillness. Steam curled from the mug as I brought it to my lips, letting the heat center me, even if just for a moment. Outside, the rain had finally stopped, but the sky remained gray, as though the world hadn't quite decided whether to move on or not. Then my phone buzzed on the counter. A message lit up the screen. "Richard, meeting postponed. Heading back tonight." I stared at the text longer than necessary. My thumb hovered over the screen, not replying, just absorbing the words. He'd been gone for 3 days. Some business conference in another city. At least that's what he said. A strange weight settled into my chest, tight and uneasy. Nothing had happened between Daniel and me. No lines had been crossed, not really. But the night still hung between us like a secret. And more than that, something had shifted. A door had opened, and I wasn't sure if it could be closed again. Guilt crept in. Not sharp, but quiet, slow, the kind that builds in silence and lingers in the corners. I told myself I hadn't done anything wrong. But even as I sipped my coffee, my reflection in the window seemed to question me. It was early afternoon when I heard the soft creak of the stairs. Daniel appeared in the kitchen doorway, dressed now. His hair still damp from a shower. He looked more composed than he had the night before, but there was something heavy in his expression. He sat down at the table across from me, not touching the coffee I poured for him. For a moment he said nothing. Just sat there, as if weighing whether to speak. Then finally he did. "There's something you should know," he said, his voice low but steady. I blinked, caught off guard. "Okay." He looked directly at me now. His eyes serious in a way I hadn't seen before. "My dad. He's not who you think he is." My breath hitched slightly. "What do you mean?" Daniel hesitated, then exhaled through his nose, as if bracing himself for what he was about to say. He didn't marry you just for love, he said. He needed someone to cover his tracks, financial ones. I stared at him, eyebrows drawn together. Daniel, what are you talking about? He's in debt, Daniel said, each word like a stone dropped into still water. Bad debt, gambling, shady investments. And worse, he's been using your savings to pay some of it off. Quietly, I found the records. My skin prickled. No, I said too quickly. That's not possible. He wouldn't. I thought that too, Daniel cut in. I didn't want to believe it either. But I went through the bank statements. Your name, your accounts. Withdrawals you never made. Transfers to places that don't add up. He reached into his backpack and pulled out a worn folder, sliding it across the table. Look. I hesitated, then opened it. Inside were pages of documents, photocopies of account activity, transaction records, emails. First it was just numbers, lines of data. But then I saw my own name, my own account number, large sums of money missing, withdrawals in cities I hadn't been in, wire transfers I couldn't explain. Cold dread crawled up my spine. He said if I ever told you he'd cut me off, Daniel said quietly. But I couldn't stay silent anymore. Not after last night. The room felt like it was closing in. The floor beneath me shifted. Richard, my husband, the man I had trusted, the man I had let into every corner of my life, was not who I thought he was. You think? My voice trembled. You think he married me for my money? Daniel gave a small, almost regretful nod. I'm sorry. I didn't want to be the one to tell you. I stared at the folder, the truth laid bare in ink and numbers. My throat tightened. And what about you? I whispered, unable to stop the question that had haunted me since dawn. Why did you come to my room last night? Daniel looked at me for a long moment. His eyes didn't flinch. Because for once, he said softly, I needed to be somewhere real. His answer opened 100 more questions, and none of them had easy answers. He looked at me, and for the first time there was nothing guarded in his eyes. No hesitation, no half-truths. Just softness, something raw. Because I've wanted to talk to you for a long time, he said quietly. His voice almost too calm for the storm he was stirring inside me. You've always been the only real part of this house. The only one who didn't wear a mask. And because... He paused, the corner of his mouth twitching with something like pain. I care about you more than I probably should. My breath hitched, a sharp flutter in my chest. I didn't know what I had expected him to say. But it wasn't that. He stood then, his movements slow, deliberate. He crossed the short space between us and gently placed his hand over mine on the table. His touch was warm, familiar, careful, as if he was afraid I might flinch. But I didn't. Last night, he said, his voice dropping even lower, wasn't a mistake. It was the first time I felt peace in this house. The first time in a long while I didn't feel like I was just surviving. Something inside me cracked. Maybe it was a truth I'd tried to deny, or a longing I had pushed down for years. I didn't know. But his words lingered in the air like incense. Strange, beautiful, impossible to ignore. And then came the decision. Richard returned later that evening. He breezed through the door with the same cheerful energy he always wore, like a tailored suit. Bright smile, arms open, kisses on the cheek, casual stories about flights and meetings and the crazy traffic. He laughed easily, poured himself a drink, and acted like nothing in the world could possibly be wrong. I didn't confront him. Not right away. Instead, I watched, listened. Over the next week, I paid attention in a way I never had before. I saw what had been there all along, just below the surface. Missed calls answered behind closed doors, sudden trips with vague details, a folder on his computer that disappeared after I glanced at it once too long. Then came the credit card charges, restaurants he never mentioned, transfers to accounts I didn't recognize. All those little things I had dismissed over the years now painted a very different picture. Everything Daniel had told me started to fall into place, like pieces of a puzzle I had never wanted to finish. And when I finally saw it clearly, I knew what I had to do. It was a quiet night. Richard had fallen asleep early, a glass of scotch unfinished on the bedside table. I watched him for a while in the dim glow of the hallway light. There had been a time I loved him. Maybe I still did, in a way. But that love had turned into something brittle, something dishonest. And I wasn't going to live a life built on half-truths anymore. I packed a small bag, just the essentials. Few personal things. My grandmother's ring. And then I walked out the door. Daniel was waiting for me just outside by the car. He didn't ask me if I was sure. He just opened the passenger door and drove. We didn't run away for love. We left for truth. 1 year later we moved to Brighton, a quiet coastal town with winding streets and an old soul. I opened a small bookstore on a quiet corner. It smelled of cedar shelves and second-hand novels. And for the first time in a long while, I felt at home. Daniel took up photography, capturing quiet moments, forgotten corners of the city, the way light fell on water after rain. He flourished slowly in the open space we had made for each other. Yes, we were judged. Some people whispered, others stared. But we didn't let it touch us. Because sometimes love isn't about what makes sense on paper. Ages, roles, definitions. Sometimes it's about the moments that change you. The ones that force you to choose courage over comfort. The ones where you finally stop waiting to be saved and start saving yourself. Daniel changed my life. Maybe I changed his too. That stormy night didn't just mark the end of something. It shattered a house built on illusion. But in its place, it gave us something better. Something honest. We built a new kind of home one storm could never shake. And I never looked back. Thank you for staying with us. If you find it interesting and useful, please subscribe, like and share so you don't miss the next video. Thanks.